Loving God, you restore our presence of mind and call us by our name. Help us remember who we are so that we can grow in love and speak your peace into the world around us. Amen. Please be seated. We have one of those difficult gospel passages this morning that is particularly hard for modern post-Enlightenment people to make sense of. On the one hand, not much has changed since Jesus met this Gerasene man from the tombs on the other side of Lake Galilee. Just walk around the streets of San Francisco, and I'm afraid you can meet 50 more like him this afternoon. But on the other hand, we would not say that the poor souls that we meet on our streets today are possessed by demons. We don't literalize evil in that way anymore, and our knowledge of mental health and how to treat its disorders is very different from what it was in the ancient world. Now, whether our methods are any more effective is debatable, if you ask me. After all, plenty of people with more or less the same symptoms as this man still live among us. Whatever it is that possesses them, addiction or illness, I think it's fair to call it evil. And perhaps the modern world has been too eager to discard the language of evil. It doesn't help if we pretend that evil doesn't exist. The church recognizes this in our baptism service, where the priest begins by asking the candidate, "Do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God?" When our prayer book was being revised in the early 1970s, the committee working on the baptism service considered getting rid of that archaic question. But some argued that the evil in the world must be named, that there is great power in naming. You can't recognize what you refuse to name. Only by naming evil can you call it out and understand it and see it for what it is and reject it. Calling the thing that possesses the men in our gospel reading today a mental health disorder, however medically accurate that is, just pushes off the part of his story that we can't understand or control by one degree, because we still don't fully understand where mental disorders come from, and we're not much more successful in treating them today. And even as our knowledge grows, there will always be a wild and incomprehensible part of the infinite universe that is beyond the grasp of our finite human minds. And my guess is that human beings will always be unsettled by that incomprehensible reality and find at least some of it evil. But where we lack control, God does not. And as Jesus demonstrates in this gospel passage, God can speak peace into any darkness, if only we are able to hear him calling our name. So how does Jesus break through to this man and call his true self out of the depths of his anguish? I believe it's because he asks him what his name is. It helps that Jesus can see his humanity, however buried it is under layers of trauma. Luke has tightened up Mark's original version of this story and unfortunately omitted some details that I think can help us see the man more as Jesus does. Here's Mark's version. When Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. Mark's description of the man howling and injuring himself breaks my heart. This man is broken and exhausted by the powers that possess him, and yet he is trying to assert some kind of control over them, even if that control is self-harm. Mark's scene continues. When the man saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asks that crucial question, "What is your name?" Now, the demons answer first. According to Mark's text, they reply, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, it should be noted that Mark and the later gospel writers probably intended the reader to hear the stamp of the demonic Roman legions that had overtaken this region in the previous century. The Roman legion was an invading force that trampled and possessed the land against the people's will, wreaking havoc, leaving grief behind. And what better metaphor could there be for demonic possession? The demons cut the man off and don't let him answer Jesus' question. But even so, I believe that the man heard that question, "What is your name?" And I believe it is the power of remembering his name, of remembering who he is, that brings his humanity to the surface and allows Jesus to free him from his demons. Now, one of the things this man is a Gentile. This is the only time in Luke's gospel that Jesus goes into Gentile territory and brings them the light of the good news. It turns out, surprisingly to us maybe, that the Gerasenes aren't that interested in the good news that Jesus has to offer. Even though they see that Jesus has healed one of their own, their response is to ask Jesus to leave. Luke says that it was because they were seized with great fear. And I think part of that is how uncanny it is for this man to be suddenly healed, suddenly changed. However bad things are, human beings detest change. And the manner of this healing, Jesus talking with the demons and then driving them out, and then the irrational behavior of the pigs, was more than enough to cause fear. But besides the fear, there was the fact that Jesus had just unemployed a few swineherds and generally upset the local economy. This is often the case when God moves in our lives. Things change, priorities are shifted, and that's not always comfortable. But think of the man now kneeling at Jesus' feet, as Luke says, clothed and in his right mind. The good news was worth it for him. So much so that he begs Jesus to allow him to return with Jesus and his disciples back across the lake. But Jesus chooses to leave this man behind in his own country, restored to his own people. And he makes this man the first apostle to the Gentiles. Return to your home, Jesus says, and declare how much God has done for you. And so he does. I pray that we will stay open to the movement of God's Spirit in our lives, in our world, no matter how much the good news upsets our well-ordered universe. And I encourage you sometimes to go to the other side, as Jesus did, to seek out the suffering souls that live in this city with us. Try to see them with God's eyes and do your best to call them by their name. Amen.